Okay, welcome to fraction, decimal and percent part 2, where I'm just going to go through a whole lot of worked examples just to sort of show you the types of calculations that we're going to have to be comfortable doing. So this first little bit is converting between fraction, decimals and percents. So let's just jump straight in. So first of all, we'll do convert to decimal. So we've got a couple of percents and a couple of fractions. So essentially, like we talked in the first video, the percent is 100 times bigger than the decimal representation. So this first one, all we really need to do is divide by 100. That shifts the decimal place 2 spaces. Oh, in this direction, 1, 2. So this equals 0.6. We've got 1, 2 spaces. Same thing here. We essentially need to divide by 100, which shifts the decimal point, which is there, 2 spaces. Divide by 100, don't use a calculator, just look at it and go, oh, move the decimal place. So this equals 0.53. Converting fractions to decimals is the one where we divide the top number by the bottom number. So just in green, I'm going to write what you would type in the calculator. 2 divided by 3 equals, and this equals 0.66. It keeps going. So I'm just going to write that as 0.66, and I'm going to put a little dot over it, which means the 6 recurs, it keeps going. Again, over here, what you would type in the calculator, top divided by bottom, 3 divided by 4 equals, and your calculator should give you 0.75. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so to convert to a percent, so up here we had percent to decimal, we divided by 100. Looking to decimal to percent, we multiply by 100. So there's our decimal place, and we want to move it 2 spaces that way by multiplying by 100. So without a calculator, this equals 48%. This one here, we've got 1.35. Don't get confused by this. We're still only multiplying by 100, which moves the decimal place 2 spaces this way. This equals 135%. Some people think that you can't have a percent bigger than 100. You can. This just means that we've got more than what we started with. Okay, in the previous video I talked about converting fractions to percents. It's easier to turn it into a decimal first. So we're essentially going to do this strategy here, get it to a decimal representation, and then we're just going to do this, multiply by 100, so we're just going to shift the decimal place. So on the calculator, you type in 1 divided by 4 equals, and your calculator is going to tell you 0.25, and then we want to multiply that by 100. So we're going to end up with 25%. Same thing here, 3/8. So we're going to type in 3 divided by 8 equals, and I can't do that in my head, so I'm going to use a calculator, 0.375. So that's the decimal representation. We're going to multiply it by 100, so the decimal place moves 2 spaces. So we end up with 37.5%. Okay, the next section is converting to a fraction. So we talked about in the previous video, the percent to a fraction, we write it straight as a fraction over 100. And when we do that, we lose the percent symbol. And then we need to simplify it to its smallest possible representation. So I'm just going to jump straight in and write this as 80 over 100. But there are definitely common factors between 80 and 100. So I think the quickest way to get there is to break this into something times 20 and this into something times 20. How many 20s do we need for 80? We need 4 times 20 over 5 times 20. But because we're essentially multiplying by this 20 over 20, it's 4/5 multiplied by 1. So those 20s cancel. 20, how many 20s? Only one of them. So 80% in its simplest fraction form is 4/5. Okay, 22%. Same strategy here. I'm just going to write it as 22 over 100. So I drop the percent. So that's a fraction. But to simplify it, just looking at the 22, the only way that factorizes is 11 times 2. And I can write 100 as 50 times 2. This is 11 times 2, 50 times 2, so that's, multiply those out, we still get back to this, but like we had over here, those 2's cancel, and we end up with 11 50ths, just 11 over 50. So converting decimals to fractions, we can do decimals that stop. We can do decimals that have a repeating pattern, but decimals that keep going and don't have a pattern, we call those irrational numbers. They can't really be represented as fractions. You can approximate them, but as long as the number stops, we'll have no problem. So remember we talked about how in the decimal part, these are the units, these are tenths, these are hundredths. So really we need to work out what do we multiply this 0.30 by to turn it into a whole number. So because the decimal place is there, we only need to multiply by 10. But then we've got a number that's 10 times bigger. So we divide by 10 as well, and that's what we write at the bottom of the fraction. So I'll write this in green just for the thinking. 0.3, I'll lose that, times 10 equals 3. But because we've times by 10, this 0.3 equals 3. So this is our number times by 10, and then we'll divide it by 10. And I've written it as a fraction. So 3 divided by 10 is going to give us that. In the same way here, we've got 3 tenths in the same way that we do there, but we've also got 7 hundredths. I'm going to go through a few steps here, but where you'll see where we get to. So this, I'm going to write this in green because this is just thinking, just sort of show you what's going on. So this is 0. We know from this that we've got 3 on 10. That's the 3. And this is 700ths. So we just need to combine those. So really we need this to be an equivalent fraction with the same number at the bottom. So this is the same as, I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 10. 7 on 100. So really, I'm multiplying 0.37 by 100. Move the decimal place to there. 37 over 100. That's it. Okay, so I'll leave that just for a second. Now I'm going to rub it all out. And we will do a few examples now using these rather than just converting between them. Okay, so the first one, 2, is expressing one amount as a percent of another. So our first example here, the blue pen, is express $40, thinking ahead, as a percent of $45. So essentially what that's asking is if $45 is 100%, what proportion of this is the 40? So what we do there is we make a fraction where we treat this as the whole, say the whole pizza, and this is what we've got of the pizza. We've got 40 out of 45, but we want it as a percent. So we need to convert this to a decimal. And in the calculator, you would type 40 divided by 45. And I'm just going to do that. Equals, so we've got a repeating decimal, 0.888 recurring. But then we need that as a percent, so we're just going to multiply. And again, in our heads, multiply by 100 is going to move that decimal place 2 spaces. So this will give us a grand total of 88.88 recurring percent. Should actually, let's write it as 88.89. I will round that one. Okay, the second example. Express, same sort of question. Express $1.25 as a percent of $6. So again, we're going to start off making a fraction, type it in the calculator to turn it into a decimal, and then multiply by 100. So $1.25, $6. That equals, let's just type it in, 0.20833, and then it keeps going. So that's the decimal representation. And then in our heads, we're going to multiply by 100 to move that decimal place. This equals 20.83%. Just going to round it off. Okay, so that's expressing one amount as a percent of another. So we make a fraction, turn it into a decimal, multiply by 100 to make it into a percent. Okay, the next couple of questions are finding a percentage of an amount. So these are just the book references. So we need to find 80% of $190. So what we need to do here is to convert the percent to a decimal, and the of, turn that into a multiplier. So essentially we're dividing this by 100, shifting the decimal place. This becomes 0.8 and multiplying by, so it's essentially saying 0.8 lots of 190. And this equals, type it in a calculator, $152. So the next question, part B, is finding 52% of $45.30. With money, don't forget the dollar sign, and with a decimal, always fill out the zeros up to the cents. So we're going to use the same process, turn this into a decimal, 0.52 times $45.30 equals, and I know my answer is going to be an amount of money, 0.52 times 3, and my calculator says 23.556. I'm going to round that to 2 decimal places. 5, 6. That's essentially it. Once you get the number into the decimal representation, you just multiply. Okay, the next type of thing that you'll need to be able to do, 1.4, is increase or decrease an amount by a percentage. So there's 2 methods you can use for this, but I'm sort of hoping that once you see the second method, you'll be like, oh, that's easier. I'll do that all the time. Okay, so first example is increase $85 by 15%. So what we're going to end up with, before we even jump in and do anything, we're going to end up with $85 plus 15% of $85, because we're just increasing this by some proportion of it. So the first method, method 1, and I'll just sort of list the steps. Find percent amount, then add to original amount. Okay, so let's do that. So to find the percent amount, so we need to find 15% of 85. So converting the 15% to a decimal, 0.15 multiplied by 85 equals $12.75. Now I haven't written the dollar yet because it's not my final answer. Save that for the end. So that's find the decimal amount, and then we need to add to the original amount. So that's step one. Step two is 85 plus 12.75 equals $97.75. Okay. Now I'm going to do this question again, but method 2. And this is the method that I would normally use. And so we just have to go through a little bit of thinking beforehand. So with this step here, we're essentially going, well, that's 100% of what we started with, and that's the 15%. So what we're going to do is, instead of working out the 15% and then adding it on, we're going to realize at the start work it out, the percent we end up with, and then just multiply. Might not be the best way to explain it, but once we do it, we'll get there. So kind of like I had down here, we want to find, that's our $85, 100%, and we're increasing it by 15%. So this essentially equals our final answer, which is what this is going to be, is 115% of the original answer. So what happens is we get $85 for this bit, $12.75 for this bit, but this bit combines those because we're talking about the percentage of the same number. So really what we're doing here, we'll convert this to a decimal. So 1.15 times our $85. And if you type that in the calculator, you will go straight to $97.75. Because really we've got one lot of 85, which is what we had here, and the 15% of 85, and they're added together. So if you can just sort of think the problem through to start with, work out what percent you're going to end up with, then really you're just multiplying one thing. Multiply, then add then multiply. Okay. So the next one I'm going to do is decreasing an amount by a percent. And it's very similar. So what I'm going to do is, what about that? And that. And that. Let's say. So this is now decrease. Decrease $95 by 20%. So these methods are essentially the same, except instead of adding, we're subtracting. So this is find the percent of the amount. So we're going to turn 20% into a decimal. 0.2 multiplied by $95 equals $19. But then we're decreasing this. So now we need 95, take away 19 equals, and this is going to be my final answer, so I'm going to put dollars equals 76. So we ended up with something smaller because we decreased. Now, method 2, essentially the steps are the same. Work out the percent we're going to end up with, and then just multiply. So, kind of like we did in the increase example, we're starting with 100%, and we're decreasing by 20. And the reason we can do this is because we're talking about a percent of 95. 100% of 95, take away 20% of 95, is going to give us 80% of 95. So now we've found the percent that we're going to end up with, convert it to a decimal, multiply it by the number we're starting with, and this is going to give us directly $76. So both methods work fine. This one, I kind of think it's a little bit easier because it gives you the answer and we can do simpler calculations on these